Welcome to the Natural History Cupboard. Come on in. And welcome back to the Natural History Cupboard podcast, with a place where the weird and wonderful parts of the natural world come together. I'm your host, Gareth, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Erin. Erin, what have you been doing?
Before I answer your question, I need to pose a question that I don't know why it's not occurred to me for in the 5 years that we've been doing this. But which one of us is the weird and which one of us is the wonderful?
I don't know. I think it's a bit of both.
Okay, very, very political answer. Well
done. I mean, I'm definitely weird.
What have I done this week? I've actually had a very productive, very busy, but also in nature week. So, as you know, I've been going up to several places further afield to collect bits and pieces for the van, which has been really cool, really fun. But I've also we've been going for more walks recently. We went round a local reservoir called Whistling Pound.
Oh, was a nice one. Yeah.
Yeah. I went round there with the Merlin bird app just on in the background. I've a lot of birds. A lot of birds.
That doesn't surprise me.
Very cool. And then on Sunday just gone, I was paddleboarding.
Oh, very nice.
Which was really nice.
What's the water like this time of year?
Freezing. I could say it's rather cold, but it was nice to try out my toasty new wetsuit that I got for Christmas. So
cool.
Yeah.
What
about you?
I'll tell you what I have found at Whistling Pound in the past is the world's largest slug.
Oh yeah.
So the ash grey slug we do get that is native to the UK, and I've seen one there. I mean, it was that big, so that's a decent sized slug, but that's not the biggest, you know. They can get bigger than that. But I was most of the week has been just bog standard usual stuff. But on Saturday I went to the National Trust with Drew and Jess, and we went and looked at a bunch of toad porn. Toad porn, just toads mating like mad in ponds. Hundreds of them, just mating balls of toads. Drew's there with his camera, looking a little bit toads. So no, it was really nice to see just that amount of animals, like out and active and doing, basically getting ready to breed and everything. And then I was thinking, I wonder if I've got any toads that have turned up in my pond yet. But no, nothing in there. Loads of plants in there growing really well. So hopefully at some point, I guess. Apart from that, not much else really. Although on the way in here this evening, I did hear a little owl as I was coming up the path.
Oh, really?
So there's a little owl out there somewhere.
That's cool. The other day, I could hear a tawny owl out there. And on our way home tonight from the shops, we saw a barn owl. One thing I forgot to mention about Whistling Pound, and I'll put the video up behind me, is we're at that time of year where some of the larval things are taking flight.
Yeah.
And so you had a load of midges over the surface of the water. Yeah, I didn't get bitten.
No, I don't tend to get bitten by them.
But they were getting bitten.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fish were jumping up and I thought, I'm gonna get my phone out.
Did you get anything?
Didn't get a fish. I got a bat.
Oh, good.
A bat coming down and really close to the water, so that's what you'll be
skimming through them.
That was really cool because I know bats do it, but I've never caught bats doing it before.
No, that's pretty cool.
So yeah, that was fun.
Should we head into the news?
Let's do it.
It's the news. Right, well, we're into this week's news. Erin, what are we looking at?
So my first article comes to us from the BBC News, and their headline is "Zoo-bred lynx could be first released into the wild."
In Scotland?
Unfortunately, not. Nuki Zoo's lynx kitten, born last year, is an incredibly special individual, as she has been selected as a candidate for wild release.
Nice.
Europe's Lincoln Lynx Rewilding Conservation Programme aims to create and protect a healthy population of lynx reintroduced into mountain ranges across Europe. And now this kitten will be basically examined, and should she pass, she'll be rehoused into a semi-wild enclosure in Germany for her transition period from captivity to the wild. During this kind of transition time, she'll be helped to develop the wild skills that she'll need to survive. So yeah, very good news. It's unfortunate that Britain can't get on board lynx reintroduction. Hopefully, if we just hit people over the head with science enough, eventually they'll.
Do you know what? I'd love to see, sort of to really sort of show it to those politicians in Scotland who didn't want lynx. I would love to see English politicians or Welsh politicians go, oh, hang on, we'll do it. You could definitely release them in parts of, say, Dorset or wherever, to basically help, or around here, for instance, to help with controlling of deer populations. Yeah. So my first story comes to us from the BBC also, and it's the news that has been doing the rounds everywhere this week of woolly mice, designed to engineer mammoth-like elephants. And that is from Colossal Bioscience, who've been doing that. I've got to admit, they're quite nice-looking, fuzzy little mice, basically, that look like they've been through a tumble dryer and just sort of poofed up a bit.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have been skeptical about why on earth they've done this, but it's not to create mammoths out of mice. It is basically testing theories on turning genes on and off, so that when they get to the point of trying to recreate a mammoth, because they're not going to be cloning a mammoth Jurassic Park style, they're going to be bringing essentially traits that are mammoth-like in Asian elephants until they get to something that is akin to a complete mammoth.
Yeah.
So this is the sort of first test step in that process, which means woolly mice, I guess. But in my mind, I still think that of all of the projects that Colossal Bioscience are doing, I still think the thylacine one is the most conservation appropriate, I suppose. The habitat's still there. Mammoths, there's not very much of the habitat left, and it's only getting worse. It's going to do far more for the actual country that they're in, as opposed to what mammoths would do. And I think that the level of steps to get there by using Dunarts and using them as the surrogates, it takes a lot less than what they're having to do with woolly mice. As much as I think it's an interesting breakthrough, I still think that the thylacine is the better project out of all of them, and it doesn't seem to get anywhere near the level of attention that mammoths do. That's because obviously mammoths are more of a household name.
And also Northern Hemisphere bias.
Basically, yeah. Big animal bias as well.
You know how I feel about all species that Colossal Biosciences are talking about, but thylacine is top of my list too, and I have an extreme bias for woolly mammoths, so I can't wait to see them both back, but I'm hoping that thylacine...
I think thylacine first.
Well, in terms of hope, yes, but I think they are thinking that mammoth will get here first.
We should see.
I think, but we could go on that tangent for a long time. But yes, I agree with you. So my next article comes to us from Science Alert, and the headline is "Remarkable drone footage reveals how narwhals use their tusks."
I saw this. Yeah.
So really cool. Yeah. So we've discussed previously in our narwhal creature feature the myths that surround the tusk of a narwhal, but actual footage of the tusks in action is just about non-existent until now. Thanks to a team of researchers, drone footage captured of an Arctic pod clearly shows the animals using their tusks for play, for foraging, and to explore their environment.
And to just sort of tickle each other at distance. So my next article, I think this is an interesting one. It's from... Pardon me. So my next article comes to us from Unilad, that bastion of accurate information. So after pouring through a lot of rubbish and gumph. It's a rather interesting article in itself. It's man discovers he's incredibly lucky to be alive after people spotted terrifying detail of his photos. And this is the news that a man who went to the Red Sea to go snorkeling and took some wonderful photos of the different animals that he encountered and then posted them up online. Turns out he was incredibly lucky to have not died there and then, because in the process of him putting these photos up, Reddit users, which, I mean, Reddit is just one of those things where you just end up with 1,000,001 people giving you every different opinion. But a Reddit user, u/aardvark took to the thread r/animal laid animal ID. Took to the thread r/animal ID last month to share a photograph from the trip to their trip to the Red Sea in Egypt. Now, essentially, the photo is of him holding a small shell about the size of his hand. In one of his palms. The users explained that the photographer had taken the user explained that the photograph was taken a while ago using a GoPro to get the photo. I thought it was just a very pretty seashell and was thinking about taking it home with us as a souvenir, but I noticed it was still alive, feeling some weight and movement inside, so I decided at least to take some pictures of it. Only months later, he was told that handling it could have been, the last idea he'd have ever made, because he was holding was a cone shell, one of the most venomous creatures on the planet. So a bunch of people obviously explained to him that what he was doing was incredibly stupid. And basically it became a question of how lucky is he not to have been stung by this thing. To give you an idea of some of the effects of cone shell venom, they are, basically described as an undersea lethal cocktail. They will set off weaknesses, initial weakness, sweating, vision changes, muscle paralysis, respiratory failure, and then finally cardiovascular collapse and coma. And this is all delivered through a wonderful little harpoon that this snail will stab you with. It is used in its normal life to catch prey. The reason it's so potent as a toxin is it's a snail. It can't chase after things, so it has to kill it pretty much there and then envelop it. So as a general rule, unless you know what you're doing, don't go picking stuff up. Because it may be the last thing you ever pick up.
So from kind of good news and fun news to funny news, and now we have to deal with the bad news. Because Sky News is reporting jet fuel and sodium cyanide. North Sea crash could have lethal consequences for wildlife. And it's kind of, there's a little bit of breaking news mixed in with this, because my article
by the time it gets to you, it will be a week old.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Breaking news for us.
By the time I'm recording this, my article is actually out of date. So by the time you guys get it, it's going to be crazy out of date, I suppose. Basically, if you're not aware, you probably are by now, a crash involving a Portuguese cargo ship and an American oil tanker occurred off the coast of East Yorkshire on March 9th, causing a raging onboard fire and a chemical spillage pouring out into the North Sea. Incidentally, I believe when the two collided, there was in fact a massive fireball that went off almost immediately.
The American one was carrying thousands of tons of jet fuel.
It was 130,000 barrels of kerosene was on.
Nice.
Now, we've just been talking about this off camera. There are so far no confirmed deaths, but one person's missing, isn't it?
They've stopped looking.
They've stopped looking for him. He's presumed dead. Also, was it a 56-year-old has been arrested on negligence and manslaughter. Other than that, at this moment in time, other details remain pretty unclear. In fact, when I first wrote this article, none of these details that we've just spoken about were actually there for us. It is a horrendous incident for everybody involved, but not least of all for the environment. As I say, 130,000 barrels of kerosene. That's the fuel that is used to keep airplanes aloft. Has been basically spilling out into the sea right now. Feels a little bit weird that I was out paddleboarding in
the North Sea.
In the southwest, but somewhere else in the sea, very close. This was going on. It's just it's a crazy world that we're living in right now. But
I mean, the avgas itself is thankfully lighter than water, will sit on the surface and can be contained.
It's also not as viscous as oil, so
it won't do as much damage in the traditional sense of like an oil spillage. I think it's the sodium cyanide that's probably slightly more concerning.
That's what I was getting to. Yeah. So basically, this chemical is a massive pollutant in terms of it's going to now be poisoning plant and animal life alike. It's going to toxify the sea in that area from and this is one of those special areas around Britain. I suppose other places in the world as well, but Britain has some really nice estuaries. And this is one of these boats was literally anchored right off the estuary.
Off the coast of Grimsby,
So in fact, Grimsby Hospital is where a lot of the casualties have been taken to before being moved on. But yeah, not good news at all. One of the animals that is at risk is obviously harbour porpoises that have historically been a species requiring the EU's most stringent protections. So yeah, not good.
So my final article is also not a good one as well. It also comes from the BBC, and it's the US has lost a fifth of its butterflies within the last 2 decades, which is saying something. Considering when we talk about wildlife depletion in countries, we tend to talk about the UK. We're a small country, but America is a giant place comparatively. So to lose a fifth of its butterfly populations, that's scary. So the numbers fell by 22% between 2000 and 2020, according to research by Binghamton University in New York. A third of species saw serious declines, with some like Julia's skipper losing more than 90% of their population. However, the research says butterflies may be able to recover if urgent conservation measures are taken. Well, I think we can probably safely say that those urgent measures are probably not going to be taken at the moment.
That's not the best time for urgent climate measures in America.
Now, didn't you base one of the colour designs of your creature feature species on an American species of butterfly?
This week we've got a pterosaur species you're featuring. Well, that one was a pterosaur species too. It was Pteranodon.
That's right, yeah.
It was based on 3 different species of Kansas butterfly because Pteranodon was found in Kansas.
There you go.
To honour that state.
There you go. So yes, not a particularly great news story, that one. That's pretty much our headlines for this week. But with the main news article, Aaron, is it anything good, or is it also bringing us down again?
I think there's several reasons to rejoice a little bit over this. Firstly, this is an article brought to our attention by Chris Ackerson.
Yes.
He gave it to us 2 weeks ago now, 3 weeks ago now.
Yeah.
And I can't remember why, but it had to be postponed till this week. The other bit of good news is it comes from a website called the Good News Article.
Fair enough.
Sorry, the Good News Network.
So we know that it's at least a good news story.
So it's from a good news source at least. But no, I think this is a rather interesting thing, and I'm really glad that Chris brought this to us. So the headline, as I say, it comes from the Good News Network, and the headline is: Bison ranchers return thousands of animals to native lands and witnessed total rejuvenation of the ecosystem. Who would have thought? That's not part of the article, obviously. but as you get into who the ranchers are, it becomes clear why this is good news, I think. So essentially, a network of bison ranchers is being set up by a tribe-based non-profit organization aiming to restore the Great Plains ecosystem, restore native ranchers' connection to their ancestral land, and restore the native diet of their ancestors. The Tanker Fund, really cool name because Tanker is
Tanker is buffalo or bison.
Exactly. So the Tanker Fund is a cause benefiting human and animal alike. By coordinating donors and partners, the fund can finance the reclamation of lands through purchasing ancestral tribal lands, installing and repairing integral infrastructure, things like fences and such, increasing the herd sizes of the bison themselves, and accessing bison meat markets across the US, as well as Resurrect the Prairie, which is an environment that covers just 1% of the land it historically occupied. So,
which I'm guessing a lot of those butterfly species that we've talked about probably relied on.
I should say so, yes. The concept hinges itself on essentially the ranch style of agriculture being used on a species that is both an environmental keystone and of significant, or rather unimaginable, cultural importance. So many of the prairie's species, animal and plant alike, are either entirely or near completely dependent on the bison. For example, the wallows that are created by their rolling in the dried earth soon fill during the rains and provide homes and water sources to all manner of small species, from small mammals and small reptiles, all the way up to invertebrates like the butterflies that you've just been talking about. Other smaller ungulates, things like deer and pronghorn, they use bison trackways to make navigating the range in thick snow a lot easier as well. Their poo also finds its uses I've forgotten the species.
Dung beetles?
There's dung beetles, yes, but also there's a bird species that uses it. I can't remember its name.
Yeah. Well, like a ground nesting bird, or
yes,
prairie chicken, nests, sage grouse.
It uses the poo to hide its nest, basically.
Like a plover or something.
Yeah, I can't remember what the species is. In fact, I'm pretty sure you might have named the species now. It's just gone over my head. Anyway, even the carnivores benefit from the bison's presence in ways that go beyond merely a food source. Simultaneously, the bison is one of the most important species to First Nation cultures. I think it plays an important role in some of the creation myths that surround these peoples. The violent and devastating attack settlers put upon the species was a direct and unadulterated attempt to eradicate native tribes through starvation and dividing them from their spirituality. And there are direct quotes from settlers that back up that statement. So yeah, ranching bison allows the tribes people to feed themselves, protect an environment and its inhabitants by essentially using the bison as an umbrella species, and even make a bit of money off their efforts by being able to access those markets and sell their meat across the country. So personally, I think all good things so far. So that's the gist of the article. There's an insightful video accompanying it on the page that will tell you more about what the Tanker Fund actually does. But yeah, that's the article. My thoughts on it, as I said, I feel pretty positively about this. Chris was asking us how we feel about it.
I mean, there's not really anything bad to say about it.
Not really. I do understand that some people, quite rightly, will be concerned about the meat production aspect of this. But if you imagine that these bison are basically being ranched, which is in such a way that it's kind of fun but kind of wild management.
Yeah, it's very different from how meat is farmed in America today with feedlots and things.
Yeah.
So it's never going to be at the same sort of price point that stupidly cheap meat will be, because the animal welfare is much lower than it should be, and also the diet that the animals are fed are much lower. So you're getting better welfare for the animals by having them, even doing cattle in the same way that you always see in like City Slickers and like films like any kind of western where you'd have the cattle as a herd roaming throughout the countryside. That kind of cattle herding doesn't really happen as much in sort of modern America.
No, not nowhere near as much. And I just this is brilliant in so many ways. You're bringing back the bison. The bison are bringing back the prairie. The prairie is bringing back the other species that inhabit it through its own rejuvenation. And at the same time, the natives are getting to have that integral link to the land and nature that is so important to them. They're getting that back. And they're also getting a chance to earn a little money on the side of this as well. For me, it feels a little bit like nature is winning and the native people are getting some semblance of sovereignty back.
Yeah.
And when I say sovereignty, I mean actual sovereignty, not Britain's version of sovereignty, where we forget that we've been able to do a lot of stuff as part of the EU. And anyway, that's a whole story for another thing.
Let's not go down that route. No. But yeah, that's good.
I think it's good news.
I just hope it can survive the current climate, shall we say.
That's the only thing. How long this can last. There are many reasons, many pieces of evidence to suggest that a president such as the one that currently sits in office over there would not be allowing an environment to come back, a species to come back, and native people to be able to support themselves. And that. I would say that that's three things he'd be dead against. To be quite honest.
Very much so. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, should we move from bison and head into our creature feature?
Let's do it.
It's the creature feature.
Right, well, we're into this week's creature feature. And this week, we're going to start out in a place that I know both you and I have been to multiple times and have never got anywhere as lucky as the particular person who we're going to start talking about in a second. Also, last week was International Women's Day.
It was.
And this is possibly what I think one of the most influential women in science. We've covered her before in the past. In fact, this time last year, because I think we linked into that.
Yeah.
It is Mary Anning. So imagine yourself in Lyme Regis in Dorset in December of 1828. A 29-year-old Mary Anning is digging in the Blue Lays Shale, which is basically the crossover point of the very early Jurassic period rocks that you'll find there. Any earlier than that, you'd have to go to somewhere like Somerset, to where we've also been, around Blue Anchor, and you'd be digging in what's known as the Retian Penarth series, which is that crossover point between the very late Triassic, very early Jurassic. So we're in a very distinct layer of early Jurassic rock. Now, as she picks away at the rock, the assemblance of some scattered bones start to appear. In all, when it's prepared, it looks a bit like a skeleton of a bird that's hit a car at speed and lost its head. Basically onto a rock sort of situation. So the specimen consisted of a partial, disarticulated skeleton on a slab lacking its skull. So later, as with most of her finds, it would be sold off to collectors to basically pay the bills, because Mary Anning was a fossil collector, but she didn't have the financial backing of upper society to be able to just live, with what she was doing and be able to study her own finds. So a lot of them went off to a variety of different sources. In the case of this one, this specimen was acquired by William Buckland of Megalosaurus fame. He then studied this fossil and described it as a brand new species. And as is the case of most early pterosaur finds at this point in history, Buckland classified the remains of it as a member of the genus Pterodactylus. Most people are probably aware of pterodactyl, although they're probably thinking of Pteranodon when they do so. Pterodactylus is quite a decent-sized genus of medium-sized pterosaurs that are found throughout the world. And they named this new species Pterodactylus macronix. The scientific name itself derived from Greek, meaning macros, large, and onyx,
Obviously
meaning
a big rock snake.
yes, meaning claw. Pterodactylus means winged fingers, basically. So it was the big clawed, wing-fingered creature in reference to the large claws on its hand. And comparatively, they have really big claws on their hands, this species. Well, as you might be able to guess, as you've probably seen because of the key art for the episode, and if you've read the description, you'll know that we're actually talking about Dimorphodon and not Pterodactylus macronix. We will be basically looking at Dimorphodon. Now, this designation will change as history will show us, because we definitely don't call it that anymore.
Yeah.
So in 1858, Sir Richard Owen reported the findings of 2 new specimens. Again, these were partial skeletons, but at this point, they included the skulls. Now, having found the skulls, that obviously gives you a very different picture of this animal from Pterodactylus. Pterodactyls, in general, have a longer, thinner skull. Think more along the lines of a long, toothy bill of like a heron, but with teeth in it for a pterodactyl. Longer, thinner beak. Whereas Dimorphodon has a much larger, almost puffin, toucan, sort of much taller skull to it. So it looks drastically different. And because of this, Owen assigned it to a new genus, which he named Dimorphodon in 1859, with the name meaning two-formed tooth.
That's right. Yeah.
That is because Dimorphodon has a variety of different teeth in its mouth. Some of them are slightly different to the others, so 2 forms of teeth with large claws, essentially. So that's what we're looking at. Now, that might give you some idea as to what this creature looks like. But other fragmentary species were then found from that point. And in fact, some of them were then acquired by other famous paleontologists. Othniel.
The 2 that you've named already, William Butler and Richard Owen, are huge names.
Well, we're adding a third. We're adding Othniel Charles Marsh. He went and got himself a specimen as well in 1873.
This is like a Royal Rumble.
Yeah, pretty much.
Of paleontologists.
I don't believe Cope got a hold of one either. So I know that would have just kept on adding to the layers of it. But and in 1881, from a London fossil dealer, Bryce McMurdo Wright, one of the ones that were recovered from early Jurassic rocks, also from another place. I don't know. Have you been to Ost Cliff? Just outside of Bristol, basically. It's on the Severn.
I think I have, but it would have been many moons ago.
It is a very odd place to go fossil hunting because you're basically at the base of the bridge going across to Wales.
Oh, so the
Severn Bridge. So it's a very odd place to go fossil hunting. But yes, he acquired one from this rock formation around there. It's also where some of the most interesting and giant prehistoric reptiles have come from. Think of the Ost Cliff ichthyosaur. That is from there. So this is from an age where we had giant marine reptiles living in the water, relatively smallish sized dinosaurs on the land, and pterosaurs in the air. So it would have been an absolutely amazing place to be. Now, let's have a look at this odd little pterosaur, because you've probably got an idea of what you think of this animal, but as we'll point out later, it's probably different to what it actually is. So Dimorphodon was about 1 meter long and had a wingspan of about 1.7 meters. That's roughly about the size of a herring gull or a buzzard, a larger end size for a herring gull. Imagine it with a much bigger, taller head than a bird would have, a long tail, and well, the jury's still out on this as to whether it had a small little rudder-like portion towards the base of the tail, towards the end of the tail, a bit like Rhamphorhynchus, another famous pterosaur from this sort of time span.
Another cool-looking one as well.
Yeah. So the head was lightly built, but had huge holes throughout it to basically aid in weight saving. It was deep as well, so it was really quite a big skull, and allowed for a large amount of sinuses inside of the skull cavity, a lot like our lovely Allosaurus skull there. There's a lot of openings that save on weight, but also allow for a lot of internal processes to go on. The eyes were quite large as well, so it meant it was basically capable of spotting things really easily. However, the wings of this pterosaur were quite short, in fact. The first phalanx of the flight finger, which is this bit here on the pterosaur, was actually not much longer than the lower arm of this pterosaur, meaning that it wasn't built for gliding or soaring. It had quite short, stubby wings. However, it is often depicted as gliding or soaring most of the time because paleo art. If we compare this pterosaur to others that we've covered in the past, it is definitely small. We've covered some of the largest, Quetzalcoatlus and Pteranodon, are only other two pterosaurs that we've looked at. They are much bigger. This is basically a pterosaur that you could probably have sitting on your arm, I think.
Yeah, you were talking about size comparisons, and before you said the two gulls and the buzzard, I was thinking that's roughly the wingspan, 1.7 meter wingspan.
Yeah, so
it's about the size of just under the size of a raven.
Pretty much, yeah. So a big-ish bird, but not giant in any way, shape, or form. So it is definitely on the smaller size. The traditional view of this, and of most pterosaurs, in fact, until quite recently, until we've tended to lump them all together in a lot of ways, is that they all lived by sea and all were required to throw themselves off cliffs to be able to achieve flight.
Yeah,
that's very much any sort of early paleo art, and even up until the 90s and early 2000s, you would see paleo art of pterosaurs living on the edge of a cliff because there's no possible way that they could take off without just throwing themselves off. In fact, I've quite often seen art where it's sort of hanging upside down like a...
Yes, I've seen that. I have to say, I don't. You got to allow for a little bit of creative license with these things, but I really don't like that idea.
No,
it doesn't. For some reason, it does. It doesn't grind my gears, but it does kind of like. I do find it a little bit abrasive.
It's just it's going with the lowest common denominator. It looked like that, therefore it's bad. Well, that's basically the mentality that we've had with most species of pterosaur. Is it looked like seabird, it lived by sea, so it prehistoric seabird. You know.
Do you think if they were around today, we'd have Icelandic people coming over to
throwing
Wales and throwing them off cliffs?
I mean, I'd like to see someone do that with a pteranodon, you know. But no, even though they are seen as prehistoric seabird analogues, Dimorphodon has often fallen victim to this, and is very much now an outdated view. It was assumed that this creature would glide over the water surface just like any other sort of seabird, and snatch up fish in its beak with its sharp teeth. A fair assumption for the time, that being because, you know, obviously it's found in rocks that were found near what was marine deposits, and no one was really studying the paleo environment as such. So, you know, it's a fair assumption. However, this became the norm in paleo art for even longer, like I said, right up until the 2000s, where we see pictures of them still like that. Lazy assumptions, basically, because it's much easier to just copy somebody else's style than put any thought into it.
Yeah.
However, there are very much some issues with this lifestyle that don't work out from an anatomical level, but also I feel it just dumps these animals in a box marked reptile seagulls and just, yeah, that's good enough. Let's go on with it. T-Rex, big brute, eat meat. Exactly. All raptors, super intelligent, hunt in packs, all evil. You know, it's very much like that's done. We don't need to do any more with that. When in fact, this animal is so much more interesting than it often gets, you know, the credit for. So let's look at this animal with a bit more close sort of scrutiny. This animal's wings, as I said, were quite short in comparison to the rest of its body. In fact, recent studies show that the animal was actually a rather poor flyer. Its wings are proportionally short in relation to the rest of its body. Its skeleton, however, is rather robust, offering very little gliding potential, in sort of the traditional flap and glide sort of thing. In fact, the current thought for Dimorphodon is that it probably relied on short, frantic flights in somewhat the same manner as either a pheasant or a guinea fowl or something like a toroco. Animals that don't rely on flight most of the time, apart from in moments where they need to get out of the way. That makes sense. And I know I'm drawing a lot of analogies between birds and pterosaurs here, which are totally unrelated to each other, in the strictest sense. But they are living analogies that work relatively well.
Also, like, if they fill in the same niches and under the similar environmental pressures, there's always going to be that element of convergent evolution.
Yeah, and just as there's differences between bird wings, there would be differences between pterosaur wings as well. So it would appear that frantic flights were the best sort of situation for these guys, making it unlikely that they would be able to fly for long distances and probably only taking to the air as a last resort. So it isn't going to work as a strategy for finding food at sea if you are frantically flapping just to try and find a fish. So it's already looking a bit shaky on that. So what was it eating if it wasn't frantically flapping over the sea? Well, William Buckland suggested in his early studies of it that it ate insects. And fair assumption, small pterosaur, insects, why not? Initial discoveries, and that combined with its locomotion as a coastal animal as well, we can often see that this would basically put it as like a shoreline scavenger, like so many shorebirds that basically cover the strand line, picking up bits and pieces of dead stuff along the strand line, or poking through the seaweed looking for things to eat, and then taking off when danger is present from predators. However, Mark Whitten, paleontologist, has argued that the animal was actually a specialized carnivore that was too large for an insectivorous diet, but thinking that it should be a more small vertebrate diet. So things like reptiles, amphibians, maybe small mammals, would be more akin to what this animal could take down. Although he did acknowledge that it still might have eaten large insects, and thus, basically, no animal's going to part up a free meal.
No.
But it would be more specialized to hunt relatively small vertebrates. And it's, in fact, relatively weak jaw muscles indicated that it probably ate proportionally small prey. So think small lizards, basically, is its main thing. Dental microwear examinations of the teeth of these animals as well, compared to other pterosaurs, confirm this as a predator of small creatures, which show different wear patterns in different types of pterosaurs with different diets. So things like Rhamphorhynchus, having a far more fish-based diet, has different wear patterns on its teeth, and something like Angurinathus, which is a small bat-sized pterosaur, would have probably eaten insects, and they show different wear patterns on their teeth. Although I would doubt it wouldn't say no to a dead or dying fish on the beach, or an insect, likely as well. No animal is silly enough to pass up a free meal. So Sir Richard Owen argued that Dimorphodon was an ungainly quadruped. Now, this is one of the few times I kind of agree with him in some ways, because on the ground, this would have probably been a quite ungainly animal. However, he was looking at it in a much different light to how I would look at it, in the sense he viewed it as very much a reptile, a cold-blooded animal. His rival, however, Harry Govier Seeley, propagated the view that amongst pterosaurs, there were probably active, warm-blooded animals, which went against the views of animals like this at the time, and that Dimorphodon may have, in fact, been running around bipedally due to its relatively well-developed hind limbs and characteristics of its pelvis. So imagine it, and there's actually some fairly good images of like paleo art of some of the skeletons of it sort of with its wings up like this, sort of holding it out as it would have been running along, like a very odd looking little creature.
That
Sort of
is,
trotting
but
towards you on two legs.
I kind of like that idea. Up until that moment, my view of this bipedal theory was that it'd be more like kind of going back to your pheasant analogy. But I always disagreed and thought that they might have walked more like more like a wyvern.
Yeah.
That
Well,
being said, I kind of like this idea that you put forward of that.
I imagine it would be a little bit like a waiter. It looks like it's trying to hold a tray and come
Pretty
towards
shaky.
you. However, we do have fossilized track remains of other pterosaurs that have very similar body plans to Dimorphodon. So we actually know now that the quadrupedal gait, all four feet on the ground, is the correct gait
Oh,
for these animals. And they would have basically moved a lot like vampire bats. Being one of the larger bat species, they actually are a really good analogy for showing how these pterosaurs take off the ground as well. And using these fossil trackways from all over the world, we can now see that the quad launch approach, which vampire bats do as well, is the way that these guys were launched.
Wow,
so pushing off from their front legs, throwing themselves forward, and then flapping to get into the air.
So it wasn't actually all that far off of the wyvern.
No, a wyvern is probably a really good analogy. And the way of it being able to move with its wings up out of the way is exactly how that would work.
But it would have been more relevant to our subject matter of the entire podcast over the last 5 years if I had gone with vampire bat instead of wyvern.
Yes and no. Wyverns are cool.
Wyverns are cool.
So this brings us to a far more modern view of this pterosaur. That's a really bad sustained flyer. Most likely didn't eat fish and probably spent most of its time on all fours, moving through probably the canopy of the trees. Think of sort of forests that grow up to the edge of the coast, and you probably get an idea of that. Think jungle canopy. At this point, Britain looked more like the Caribbean than it does today, basically. So thick jungle canopy, lots of branches, lots of potential for these guys to move around in sort of 3D space without having to fly. So it also appears to be a competent climber. Now, remember the claws I was talking about? It possessed particularly large and curved claws, which it used to scale trees with ease and probably chase down its prey. So a more modern view of this animal would be to look at it like a cross between a turrico and a pine marten.
Okay.
Now, Drew gave me the turrico analogy because you remember the turrico that we used to work with as well.
Yep, it dive bombed me several times.
Yep.
Seemed to love me one day, next day it dive bombed me.
Basically, yeah. But if you've ever seen a turrico moving through the trees, most of the time they try not to fly. Yes. They've got proportionally quite short wings, but they're quite good at ducking through all the branches and being able to launch themselves and just open their wings enough to get a little bit of flight, just a little bit of lift, and then still be able to move through the undergrowth. And pine martens in the sense that, they leap around in the trees, they climb up them. Someone had also made an analogy that these guys are like squirrels. I prefer to think of them in a more predatory sense, as a pine marten, sort of leaping from branch, chasing down lizards and frogs, just climbing up and occasionally jumping and gliding across, I think would work quite nicely.
Yeah, I think so.
They're taking short hopping flights between the branches as it chases down lizards, which are occasionally heading down to the ground for whatever reason, if it's chased something there. If I had no option, taking a short, awkward flight back up to cover that distance if it's being chased by a predator or has been disturbed by other animals. I did mean to mention as well that these guys were around at the same time as another animal that we've covered in the past, Scelidosaurus.
Right.
And in the same sort of formations as well. So these animals would have basically interacted.
Yeah.
So, but let's talk about that version that you might be thinking of. So my thoughts on the Jurassic World interpretations of animals are quite well known, I would say. Anyone who's spoken to me, and in fact, I think we've talked about it on here.
Yeah.
I'm not alone in my view that I think the the Dimorphodons that you see in Jurassic World are an abomination. I think they look like flying gargoyle monster creatures that are just awful. And I actually took this thought and thought I have to mention this because I feel that they've done, as they say, I feel they've done them dirty because I just don't like how they look. They could have done so much better with them. So I typed into Google, why did they make the Jurassic World Dimorphodon look so bad? And I was not disappointed with what I found. Amongst a variety of Reddit posts and various other things, I came across Mark Whitten's blog post about the subject himself. And I am not alone in disliking the Jurassic World version. So I will read to you what he wrote the sort of opening weekend of Jurassic World. So with Jurassic World about to start, assaulting the box office and the intelligence of paleontologists around the globe, it seems appropriate to take a look at some of the science behind the animals featured in the film. I was quite chuffed to hear Dimorphodon was going to take to the big screen, but oh dear, poor Dimorphodon has really been mangled by the infamous reconstruction approach of Jurassic World filmmakers. And the information on their website is really awful. Powerful talons for snatching fish. Seriously? From what we've seen so far, at least, I wonder if it's one of the worst reconstructions in the film. I definitely think so. Apart from the pteranodons, which are a close second.
Okay.
Clearly, the Dimorphodon of Jurassic World is going to be nothing like Dimorphodon known to researchers. Okay, it's hardly a shock, but it's a shame nevertheless. Dimorphodon is not a theropod-headed scaly dragon, but an especially interesting and significant animal to pterosaur researchers around the world. And I could not agree more with his sentiments on that.
I don't think I've ever spoken about Dimorphodon in Jurassic World.
Yeah.
And that's for a very good reason, because I happen to agree very strongly with this. I have nothing good to say about the Dimorphodons.
They look awful.
I will say I disagree with your sentiment of I think you put Pterosaur down there. I find the addition of the teeth in the third film to be offensive.
Yeah.
But I find that because I really like this animal and I feel that they did it dirty by basically making it a disappointment to everyone who was born after 1993, 1994.
Yeah.
That's Dilophosaurus.
Oh,
I
definitely.
think they really messed up Dilophosaurus.
Well, it is what it is. We'll leave Dilophosaurus
Yes.
for another day. But and I agree with this sentiment. This is a species of pterosaur I've loved since being a kid. So it's a shame to see it being turned into a movie monster, more like a flying demon than a fantastic flying squirrel lizard of the canopy. So this is one of the many reasons I've never been a massive fan of the depictions of dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures in that franchise. But bad movie versions aside, Dimorphodon is an absolutely stunning animal that deserves more attention than it seems to get. In fact, in the process of doing this research, I found out there was remarkably little out there about these animals, YouTube or various different anything wise, basically. So hopefully this creature feature goes somewhat to redressing that balance. And at the same time as well, it got me thinking. I thought back to years and years ago as a little kid and reached out to my parents and said, I vaguely remember drawing a picture of Dimorphodon when I was like 6 or 7. Do you still happen to have all like my old pictures that I drew? And believe it or not, they actually found it. They found like the old picture that I had drawn of that skeleton drawing of the Dimorphodon on 2 legs.
That's
because
cool.
It was one of those early ones that was sort of floating around, and it was such an interesting looking animal that it just grabbed me at that point, and I had to draw it. It's not the best piece of artwork, but it's a 6-year-old version of me doing it, so it is what it is. But yeah, that is Dimorphodon, a really cool pterosaur that deserves far better than what Jurassic World has barfed onto the screen about it. So, anyway.
In terms of those movies, I actually I don't like the way they look, but I find the behaviour of the Dimorphodon more offensive than the look.
Yeah.
The look,
They're flying demons.
they are monsters. They are movie monsters. They're
Yeah.
not really. They're not the real animals. They are movie monsters. But no, it sounds to me like Dimorphodon was certainly your kind of gateway drug into fascination with pterosaurs.
So I don't know why I didn't go further with it. That was, I think, as far as pterosaurs went for me as a kid.
Oh, right.
Yeah, until relatively recently, with a lot more information about giant Asdargids. A lot of the time, pterosaurs didn't really feature very highly for me, and I wish they had, because they're a really fascinating group of prehistoric reptiles. So, should we head into this week's emails?
Let's do it.
Bing! You've got mail. Ooh, it's an email.
Well, we're into this week's emails. We're going to start things off with last week's question, which was following on from our animal challenge to basically see who is going to be our creature of 2024. We had the Demon Duck of Doom versus the Hawaiian Stilt Owl, and well, overwhelmingly, it went to the Hawaiian Stilt Owl. Demon Duck didn't even get one look in. So, there you go. Heading through to our next, or to our final four, is the Hawaiian Stilt Owl. So our next one, and the question for this week as well, is, well, this one should be interesting because these are two that were quite popular right the way throughout. It's Thylacus smilus, the marsupial or Sporastodon sabertooth, versus Dinocyrus, the horrible hand of the Mongolian Cretaceous. So, Aaron, what are you going with for this one?
Smilus.
Yeah?
Yeah, I didn't even have to think. That's probably the quickest I've ever answered a question in the 5 years we've been doing this.
Fair enough.
But like this reasoning, I just think the artwork is it's not that the artwork is better because I like both of them. But if you had a gun to my head and you said which picture do I like the most, it would be Thylacus smilus. I think the pose is more animated. I think that's what edges it over.
It's that slight.
Yeah, I can see it on your phone, on your lap there.
Yeah.
And I just think both of them are really, really good. But it's the animation of the paw and the head turned the other way and the mouth open. Like it's much more, that artwork's more alive.
Fair enough. I find it really hard to choose out of these two because I've actually kind of got sick of them. This is saying something. These are two of my creatures again.
Yeah.
And both of them I really like. I've always liked Thylacus smilus as a species, and I've always really liked Dinocyrus. But I think the fact that both of these kicked out ones that I wanted to go through has just kind of turned me off them.
It's so agree.
It kind of is. So I don't really have a dog in this fight. I like both of them, but I also dislike both of them equally. So
gun to head. You have to choose one. I really want it to come down to Thylacus smilus and Wyson.
Do you know what? I'm going to go with Dinocyrus, not just to be like
contrarian.
Because if I remember correctly, I think the patterning that we used for it was Canada goose.
Yeah, I think it is.
So I just like the idea of it being a giant Canada goose and just terrorizing people. So going with that. Yeah, I'm going to go with that. That is this week's question. So which one of these will head through to our final four and join the Wysant and the Hawaiian Stilt Owl to make up the final four to see who's basically going to battle it out then. So make your choice in the comments either down below on if you're watching this on YouTube, or you can also do that on our Facebook page as well, where it'll be there all week for you to make your choice. So let's see who comes out on top with that one. That brings us nicely into our emails and or comments. So Aaron, do we have any emails or comments come in this week?
I'll start with our interactions on YouTube. We've got two from Kelsey Watts, who actually deserves a shout out. It was his birthday in the time between our two last episodes, so happy birthday. Kelsey Watts says, "You guys have no idea how much you saved my life at work." And the cheese cat was truly magical. I don't know, how did we save your life at work, Kelsey?
He can't answer back. You know?
And that's a question to you. That's going to come a week late, but there we go. And then Rosalie9961 has also commented saying, the Battle of the Leggy Birds. Oh, she's referencing
Yeah.
the battle to the death that we've just witnessed. Both are beautiful creatures. I'm on Team Aaron with this one. The Hawaiian stilt owl, such a cutie pie, even though it could have been good cryptid fuel for the early peoples.
I imagine it probably was, yeah.
Yeah, very, very cool animal. I feel. Well, to be fair, I like both of those animals. Again, I like both of those animals.
Both would have been terrifying to encounter as an early human going into those places with no idea what you're looking at. So, yeah.
So our next few interactions actually come to us through our emails. And the first one comes to us from someone who's been speaking to Gareth on Instagram. Shane Gowers, who says, "Hey guys, Big Pumba here, and I have a couple of questions for you both. Following the comment made on the orangutan episode regarding the pygmy people enclosures at the Bronx Zoo, yuck. It got me thinking that if we lived alongside our early hominin ancestors, such as Homo naledi and Australopithecus, do you think they'd be on display in a collection? And what ethical issues do you believe that would create? Also, on a slightly brighter note, as you've both worked in collections before, what are your fondest, funniest memories with a particular species? And also, as a former doorman, what interesting interactions have you had with the smartest and most capable animal on the planet, the public? Thank you for reading this email. All the best, Big Pumba, Shane. So thank you for your email. I did email him back just to say as much.
Yeah.
We'll answer the first question first.
Do you know what?
You go first.
I think we'd have just basically wiped out any other human relations. The only ones I could see possibly being kept around as like a curiosity for a human zoo style thing might be if we're just saying that all of a sudden all human relatives.
We're saying they're all here now in this day and age.
Well, if it was this day and age and not maybe the 1900s, I would say probably Homo floresiensis would be the only one kept around as an interesting curiosity. I think the rest of them we would have probably just mercilessly wiped out. I know that's really dark, but I don't have as much faith in humans when it comes to treating our own kind. But yeah.
Okay, so my thought patterns are a little bit similar, but a little bit different. I don't know if it's going to be arguably dark.
Neanderthals, I don't think we'd actually notice.
Well, this is where I was going to go.
That'll be the line.
So I think I agree with you. Homo floresiensis would have been kept in enclosures. I think Australopithecus would have been.
Yeah.
I think Homo naledi might have been as well. I believe that there are a few. There's going to be this weird, not to be too controversial, but I think there's going to be this weird blurring of the lines where you get
an Australopithecus is basically an upright standing chimp.
That's what I mean. You're going to get what's more human and what's more ape human.
Yeah.
And I think the ones that cross that line into more ape human are going to be the ones that are going to be in enclosures.
Seen as a curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's going to be this there'll be this blurred line where I think a very dark practice from our past may return, and that is obviously slavery.
Yeah.
And then there'll be the ones that are on the other side of that blurred line, like Homo neanderthalis, most of whom, the ones that are more obvious to pick out, would have been wiped out by us. But the ones that aren't so easy to pick out, ones like Neanderthal, I think would start off just being part of society. But I do believe we as humans, we have ways to exclude, differentiate, be mean and nasty to each other.
Even when there's no actual...
When there's no differences. You have, in places where there's nothing... So you get racism, and then there's a really great comedian that I really enjoy called Reginald D. Hunter. Do you know?
Yeah.
So I've got his DVD, and this DVD says, so in America they have racism, and we do try to be racist in Britain, but we have an advanced form of racism called classism, which is where you're racist against people that look like you. And he's quite right. I don't see a world where a lot of the more powerful nations are kind of going more right wing, where eventually we don't work out who's Neanderthal and who's Homo sapien and who's this and who's that, and there ends up with these kind of almost like Hunger Games style, like
I mean, it's getting really
factions.
dark, basically. I think the moment you start doing this,
I think it's not good. So we'll move on to your second.
Yeah, let's go for the slightly more jovial question.
So the second question, just to remind everyone, is their fondest, funniest memories working with a particular species, and the second part of that is interesting interactions you've had with smartest, most capable animal on the planet, humans, which I think is actually debatable. But
yeah, door says push, and the amount of people who are pulling. I mean, I've got my one for the public. I think works quite well.
Okay.
So whilst working in a reptile house, which I'd like to point out had no venomous creatures whatsoever, but you could hear the public on the other side of the wall because it was sort of open topped in this sort of tropical house itself. Hearing someone with their adult going down, and everything was highly venomous and dangerous and toxic. And they were saying, tortoises. Oh yeah, that's red, so it's dangerous. That one's a redfoot tortoise. That frog, highly poisonous. Oh yeah, incredibly poisonous. And I was just like, what animals are they looking at that I'm not seeing? Going for, and just everything was getting more and more poisonous and dangerous and venomous. And then right at the end of the reptile house, the little kid that's with them goes, "Are you sure about this?" And he's like, "Yeah, definitely sure, definitely." So I read a book. Just trying not to laugh so loud that they would have heard from the other side of it, as basically as I was moving at the same sort of speed, doing stuff behind the scenes as these people were moving along. So yeah, but I think for funniest animal, sort of like, or most memorable interactions, I suppose funniest to the people who were around me, or what would you think? Because I've got one where it's very self-deprecating, but it's a funny story.
You can go with it. Yeah, go on.
Why not? The story where I gave myself concussion on a brick wall.
Oh yeah.
So working with chimps, at one point, I came back into the back door of the chimp house, and I'd gone and done the morning drinks run. We'd sort of got through most of the cleaning, and it was now like we'll have a little coffee break sort of thing. So I come in the back door with the tray of drinks. Now, in one of the bedrooms, as you sort of walked in this door, was a chimp who was renowned for throwing poo. He had a particular love for sitting by that door and doing it, so you kind of instinctively knew he was there, and you sort of flinched a bit. And I flinched an awful lot as he flung the poo, which hit me as well, knocked the drinks off the tray as well. But I flinched at the wrong moment, and I went like that and smacked the side of my head into the edge of a brick wall, basically knocking me out. And I wobbled down the hallway to the end of the chimp house where everyone else is, and just sort of fall over and sort of sit there, and they're covered in chimp poo and drinks and everything. And they went, "What happened?" I went, I think I flinched. Basically, I was then taken to A&E by one of the staff, and while he went to go and park, this is the wonderful care that I received. He dropped me at the wrong door. Now I'm wandering around dazed and confused because I basically smacked my head into a brick wall, and I walk in the wrong door. I walk in the door that's meant to be for like ambulances pulling up and people being brought straight in, and I just sort of wander into this door of like the door opened, and basically that scene in The Simpsons where Mr. Burns has been like having his treatment, and he's completely out of it, just wanders off into the forest. That was me. I was like, and all I can remember is this person shouting at me, going, "Oi, you can't walk down here." I hit my head, and he's like, "Oh, come this way," and realised that I'm sort of completely out of it.
You've done
So yeah, I mean, I was fine, but
completely toasted.
just yeah. So no one got their drinks that day either.
Oh dear. What about like fond animal memory?
Oof. There's so many good ones, really. Um, I mean, just some of the fond memories is just animals interacting with you. Something like hornbills wanting to do that beak clacking thing, and just wanting to do that with your hand, or birds coming. Most of the animals I work with have been birds coming over to you and wanting to see you and just sit on you and want that sort of interaction. You tend to remember the really stupid things, I mean, some of the tortoises that I worked with, one of them trying to break my leg by walking over it, but I still love that tortoise.
I've got so many memories. So okay, so one of the more hairy kind of animal interactions I've had, it involves chimps as well.
Of course. I mean, I think they're a species that you remember because of some of the most ridiculous things happen with those.
They are, and some of the most interesting things. I've told you about the morning routine where they're all sat in that was odd. But I've told this story before, I think, but I'm not going to name any of the zoos that are in this, okay? In any of these stories. But one place I got a little bit of experience, a little bit of experience. Let's say a tiny bit of experience with chimpanzees, and I loved what I did get. But I was allowed to go up and do the scatter feed for them, and this particular scatter feed happens from like a balcony kind of arrangement with basically Gorilla Glass as your safety barrier and a metal handrail. And I'm chucking food out, of course, and it's all kicking off inside. The dominant male is having a tantrum about something, and there's some outside who are peacefully picking up stuff. There's others inside screaming as well. Anyway, I chuck this apple, and it's just at that moment that the kind of flaps of the entry from the inside to the outside burst open, and out this dominant male comes exploding outwards, and then he just stops. And it's with dread that I realised that he stopped right under the peak of my throat, and this apple is now hurtling down towards him like the KPG asteroid. And it hits him on the shoulder in what I can only imagine to him must have felt like a tap. But he was in a mood, and that was an offence. And he looked over his shoulder, like his back was to me, and he looked over his shoulder like this, straight up at me. It's like the Rock with like the people's, not really with the people's eye, but he was looking dead at me, and he grabbed the closest thing to him, which at the time was half a cabbage.
Nice.
About the size of the KPG asteroid. And he launched it like a discus straight at my head. And just lucky he couldn't do that because it dropped just before it would, and it hit the corner of where the two panes of Gorilla Glass meet. It shattered against that, and I felt like the whole balcony shook. And I realised then that was the wrong thing to do, was to throw an apple at that moment. I didn't know he was going to stop there, grumpy so-and-so. And I think my fondest memory, bear in mind I've always wanted to work with tigers since I was probably about 3 years old. I've always wanted to work with tigers, and we moved some tigers off of a drive-through area into a walkabout area.
Not walking in with
no, not walking in with the tigers. From what I understand, the tigers had tested biting tires, and they liked the feel of the air rushing, and so they decided to do that to more cars. So they got moved off the drive-through, and eventually they got what I consider to be one of, if not the best tiger enclosure in the UK, possibly in Europe. But anyway, They moved down onto my section, or the section that I worked, and I got the privilege of going down and basically spend after my main routine kind of duties were done. I got to spend hours down there, just sat there chilling out with them, letting them get used to my presence and stuff. And at first, they really didn't like me because I was one of the first people they saw when they woke up. Especially one in particular saw me and was very angry when she woke up from the sedative that we used to be able to move them down. Anyway, as weeks went on, they got more fond of me. They'd come and sit over by me, but one in particular, I can't name her because then it obviously gives away the collection. But one in particular would then come and chuff to me, which is a social noise that tigers make. And every time, without fail, if I chuffed to her, she chuffed back. It's nice. A very easy noise to do. I don't know if the mic will pick it up. I will try.
It will.
Now, if that didn't pick it up, you're basically kind of breathing out and repeating a soft kind of F noise. F, 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 F.
Yeah.
And for someone who has admired tigers as long as I have, that's really something. To move on to the human element of his question, there's a couple come to mind. There's a few that come to mind, but
there's one gruesome one that's jumped to my mind. We could be here all night doing this, actually.
So again, not naming collections, I was in a tiger, in the keeper area of a tiger enclosure when we heard an incredibly loud shout. And me and my colleague had to basically we checked the tiger enclosure, make sure no one was there. We locked it up, and we were like instantly on the move. And what had happened, as it happened, we ended up in a bit of a car chase. And what basically happened was someone had come in to cause trouble, knowing that other members of his family were visiting that day. He'd come to cause trouble with them, and there was a massive kind of bust up in the toilet block that's just outside the tiger enclosure. And eventually a car was written off using hockey sticks and baseball bats. So hockey sticks and baseball bats, and we were in the car chasing them out, basically. Police were involved in all sorts. So that was fun. But one of my funniest memories of working with people is working with our colleague Shane, who's been on the podcast with us.
Yeah.
And we were doing some renovation work to a lion enclosure.
I knew you were going to go with this story.
And there's dead trees, and they were a bit of a risk to the integrity of the fence. So
you realise you've got to find this now.
I am going to try and download it. I know it's on Facebook, but I don't know if I can download it or not. But I'm going to try.
Yeah.
And I thought that I could take it down with a drop kick. So, and Shane offering me a last minute out of what was going to be an embarrassing situation said, "Are you sure you can do this?" And I said, "Yeah, I reckon it'll go down in one." I think I'm on camera saying those exact words. And I ran at this tree. I drop kicked it with all my force.
You managed to get both legs off the ground.
Both legs off the ground, probably like Maven or Jeff Hardy style drop kick, double foot drop kick. And you just see me go, boom, boom. And the tree barely moved. But I swear, I was shaking that tree and I was sure, I could hear it cracking up, or it's going to come down in one. He said, "Do you have another in you?" No.
Interestingly enough,
I think I do.
Interestingly enough, I actually have used that story with my students about enclosure maintenance and proper safety aspects as to what to do and what not to do. But they found it highly amusing as well. So yeah. So yeah, I mean, like I said, we could be easily here all night just regaling stupid stories and things that have happened.
The prank I played on you and Rick as well.
Oh god,
there's so many.
Yeah,
that was pretty grotesque, to be fair.
Yeah,
there's so many stories.
So yeah, that's a really fantastic question there, and I think we'll probably come back to that at some point.
I think
let's get out to it. Yeah, that was a fantastic question that has led us down very much a deep rabbit hole
Memory
there,
lane.
which could be, well, it could have us here all night, basically going over all sorts of random occurrences and things. If you have any questions, you can send them in to us on either our Facebook page, our Instagram page, which is where this one came from, our emails, which is the nathistorykcupboard@gmail.com, or on our YouTube page as well, if you want to get in contact with us. But that nicely leads us, before you start thinking of all sorts of other ways that you're trying to take trees down,
Thinking of lots of different stories.
into our Patreons for this week.
Every week, we like to give a little love back by shouting out the names of our wonderful Patreon supporters.
That's right. These are the cupboard dwellers who are kind enough to support us through a monetary contribution, for which we are eternally grateful and grateful beyond words.
And those people are, of course, Fogtober, Jen Greenhall, Connie P, Chelsea McKee, Nick to Nick,
Owen Cox,
and Matt Geddy.
Guys, your financial contributions are actively helping us out here in the Natural History Cupboard in a myriad of ways, including developing our new studio, planning excursions and being able to go out and film on location, considering technical upgrades, and actually making the jump from a solely audio-based podcast to the now growing YouTube channel. And we really can't thank you enough for that.
Now, we appreciate all of our cupboard dwellers and the support you offer us through listening, liking, sharing, and subscribing. But if you feel we've earned it and you're considering joining our Patreon, there are two options through which you can do so.
That's the Nature Nerds and the Animal Ambassador tiers, which you can find on the Patreon website, or links through our social media as well, and each one having different benefits for you to enjoy.
And now back to Gareth and Erin in the studio.
So a massive thank you there to our Patreons, as always, for all the fantastic work that you guys do. That pretty much brings us to the end of this week's episode. So massive thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
We'll get you drop kicking a tree to see if you can repeat that process.
I was going to say a particular thank you to Chris Ackerson for sending in the news article, and to Shane Gowers, Big Pumba, for allowing us to go down Memory Trip Lane, for humouring us.
Yeah,
go down there.
And the far more ridiculous ones that have come to memory since being off camera. And a massive thank you to you at home for joining us, and we'll see you next time here in the Natural History Cupboard. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, Aaron, I've got a pterosaur-based joke for you.
It's not terrible.
Yeah, well, I was going to say it might be. So, what do pterodactyls do when they're afraid?
I don't know. What do they do when they're afraid?
They scream in terror. Yeah, I know it is terrible, isn't it?